goes. We have a quick panel to basically get some context for this interaction. These are folks that are involved in our OBI-related programs, specifically related to neurodegeneration, obviously where memory is a profound symptom. Dr. Angela Troyer is the professional practice chief in psychology and the program director of neuropsychology in the Cognitive Health Service at Baycrest. Her research interest on memory changes associated with normal aging and these early cognitive disorders that we heard about, and the validation and development of evaluation tools for this, and obviously this is front and center. Baycrest has been involved in the development of an online test called Cognoscenti, which is actually a tool used for screening in early Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Barry Greenberg is the director of the Neuroscience Drug Discovery and Development in the University Health Network, where he co-directs the Toronto Dementia Research Alliance, or the TDRA, as Director of Strategy, and it's a consortium involving academic research and memory clinics in the province as well. Prior to this, he was a leader in drug discovery and development at AstraZeneca and professor of pharmacology. He's been directly involved in Alzheimer's disease research and drug discovery since the mid-'80s. Finally, Dr. Elizabeth Theriault works at the OBI. She's the Vice President of Research and Informatics at our place recently. She's got a background in neuroscience. She completed postdoctoral studies in neuroscience at Harvard Medical School and worked as a research scientist. It's a long list, I need notes. I was in Toronto here at the Playfair in the Department of Surgery looking at spinal cord injury and neuroprotection. She has been a Dean of Science and Technology and first Director of Research at the Sheridan Institute of Technology and Applied Learning. Most recently, she was the Science and Technology Counselor for the Embassy of Canada in Japan, and most recently, Assistant Scientific Director for the Canadian Institute for Health Research of Neuroscience, Mental Health and Addiction in Vancouver, and we were lucky enough to recruit her here back to Toronto. So, with this illustrious panel, I wanted just to start off and get basically their impressions of the film from their different various perspectives. And Angela, perhaps I can get you to start and look at just a comment on the intersection between biology and behavior, especially having to do with measurement. Certainly, science is all about measuring tools, and certainly if we're going to have therapies for things like Alzheimer's disease, the tools to measure our impact are going to be critical.
Yes, so yes, you're right. So a lot of the film was about the biological aspects of memory, and the work that Candel did was so important in understanding that. And with the connection then into clinical work, it's very important that we're able to measure what memory looks like in humans and different ways that we can provide treatments for them.
Terrific. The spectrum, of course, is looking at this basic neurobiology in vitro and animal systems, and then in the diseased brain, but obviously then there's a specific intersection between the healthy brain, and brain health as a concept is burgeoning. So Barry, with regards to drug development and how you show an impact of therapeutics in a complex disease system, what are some of the barriers, for example, you might see in the development of drug products for Alzheimer's?
There are really quite a number of ways to answer that question. One is there's the complexity of drug discovery in and of itself, and the process of discovering a molecule that hits a particular target that can then get into the brain and affect that target for a period of time that's long enough to have an impact. That is scientifically an extremely challenging endeavor and can take decades. The other aspect gets into the clinic, where we now recognize that individuals who come into a memory clinic with a cognitive impairment, because of the redundancy, the remarkable resilience of the brain, already are in advanced stages of the disease. And we're trying to fix something that is already fairly damaged. So the challenge is being able to get into the patient with the appropriate drug that will hit the appropriate target at a time in the disease before it is even symptomatic. And that is exceedingly difficult. And the other thing which I wanted to share, and I'm going to pull out a crib note here because I just pulled this off today. The brain weighs about 3 pounds. Within that 3 pounds, there are an estimated 100 billion neurons. Each connects with up to 10,000 others. You saw the synapses that Dr. Candel was describing. So there are approximately 1,000 trillion synaptic connections in the average brain. The Milky Way has an estimated 400 billion stars. So the brain has about 1/4 of the neurons as stars in our galaxy, but the synaptic connections would equal the number of stars in 2,500 galaxies the size of our own. And this is the organ that we're trying to treat and understand. So there's your trivia, your next trivia contest answer.
Fairly daunting, I must say. Elizabeth, you've had a long career, obviously, in looking at the intersection between basic science strategies towards clinical medicine. Any insights from the movie you'd like to point out?
Well, I think the movie was quite a tour de force. It was a lovely allegory of Eric Kandel's life and search for his own origins, as well as the Nobel Prize-winning work that he has achieved. I think one of the things that struck me is how important the resonant theme of basic science was, and that it arises in human beings for the same reasons that we seek knowledge and understanding and truth and beauty, and that it is driven with passion, as you could see for all of those investigators. And there wasn't necessarily a commercial outcome that they envisioned, but rather the understanding was the point of the exercise.
Right, terrific, thank you. And of course, these are kind of the operating principles of an organization like ours, the Ontario Brain Institute, where we're trying to speed or accelerate the progress between this bench science that's just burgeoning, but make that clinically relevant to the population. So thank you for that. I think we have a couple of minutes for any questions from the audience, if there's anybody that is interested. Yeah, so the
Sure.
question was, what is the impact of traumatic brain injury, and does the brain actually heal from injury, and what is obviously the impact on brain performance?
Yeah, that's a terrific question, and there's a much deserved media attention on this right now. The problem with concussion, of course, is that it's an injury to an organ that we don't understand very well normally. We don't understand it the way we understand the cardiovascular system or the way we understand musculoskeletal system. We have a lot of basic research there to figure out how a healthy brain works, and then what happens with a concussion, which is an actual injury to the brain, and there's many severities of it. But the problem is we can't see it. You can x-ray a broken radius and see a fracture, and then your physician can see it when it heals because it's got a callus, and then you're good to go back to work again. We have a long way to come with concussion, but the good news really is that many people who suffer concussion, at least 85 to 90% of them will not have serious outcome. It's like an injury to another organ. We will recover. There are 10 to 15, maybe 20% of people who suffer something called post-concussive syndrome, and that is an effect which lasts for months. It can last for years, and it changes who you are as a person, which is really the difficult part about it. And so I think we have a lot more work to do here, but it's an exciting time to be in the field, and we have a huge resource here in Ontario, tremendous resource in traumatic brain injury and concussion research, so it's going to be a lot of fun working with these folks in the near future to figure out the answer to your questions.
We have a question in the balcony.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes, I had a question with respect to neurogenesis, that we produce new neurons in hippocampus. How exciting is that, and how can we improve that?
If anybody want to tackle that, or shall I give it a try? So I think the idea of invoking new neurogenesis, we know that this is an active process, including in adults, associated with learning. Previously it had been said that all the neurons in the brain are post-mitotic, there's no further division. This is clearly not true, and ongoing neurogenesis is active throughout one's life. Strategies to optimize this are only just beginning to be tested in the laboratories, but will surely come into clinical use. Whether the actual implantation of new cells, such as stem cells, into the brain will have an impact, and whether those cells can find their way and become functional is yet to be shown as well, but another area of active research, especially here in Toronto.
Well, the question just now is embarked on the bottom of my question. I was going to be a little off the wall. So I would like to take that to the patient HM that I talked about before, who the treatment of the day to deal with his seizures was to remove a big part of the hippocampus. And all this plasticity, in modern times, if HM was still alive, would you view that at some point you could do a transplant there to restore the ability to make long-term memory?
I think there are a number of strategies to deal with epilepsy that were not recognized back in the day in Montreal when those surgeries were done to remove large swaths of the brain. I think, for example, you can modulate epilepsy now electrophysiologically with detection and stimulation. Whether implantation of supporting cells around a glial scar could actually influence that, remains to be seen. Surgery, however, does still remain, but I think the strategies to make sure ensure that it's safe and without long-term consequences is critical. Surgery is in fact underutilized for the treatment of refractory epilepsy, but still remains a mainstay. However, there are also other more sophisticated ways of doing stimulation techniques. Cell transplantation, I think, is in the future.
We have another question in the balcony.
Yes, please.
Yes, I was curious to know, so far we hear mostly discussions revolving around medications, that type of thing, in treatment of Alzheimer's. Are you looking at or considering a possible more natural approach? The different things are out there like green tea, ginkgo, fish oil, that type of thing. In fact, there's a recent study I discovered just done at UMaster along those lines. It seemed to be pretty successful.
Oh, certainly. Barry, you might want to tackle this one, but certainly the impact of nutraceuticals, more natural formulations of antioxidant medications and stuff are now mainstream. I think the definition of what a pharmaceutical is becoming much more broad.
It's a good question. A lot of these natural substances do have very limited access to the brain, to the targets that you're trying to affect, and we need to recognize that. What is recognized is that what's good for the cardiovascular health is also very good for the brain. The brain is the most oxygenated organ in the body, and if there's low hypertension, low cholesterol, proper nutrition, aerobic exercise, that will benefit the brain. And there are many studies going on with individual drugs, with combinations of drugs. One of the combinations that needs to be considered, and this is now just getting some discussion, is perhaps a drug with a certain basal level of cardiovascular health that may be required in order for that drug to have an effect in a neurodegenerative disease. And then again, it gets back to the issue of when is the proper time to make that impact. So I take a lot of natural products and nutraceuticals. I don't believe necessarily that any of them work. But they don't hurt me, I think. But having said that, I do think that this has to be looked at systemically. It's not the same as taking an antibiotic for an infection. The brain is extremely well integrated with the entire systems biology of the human, of the animal, and it needs to be considered at a systemic level when you're talking about things that aren't specific drug-target interactions.
And I think the concept of brain health in a pre-symptomatic population before disease occurs is critical. Another question for the main floor, please.
I understand that recently there have been some developments in the treatment of traumatic brain injury using human growth hormone, and I wonder whether those therapies have been expanded to age-related brain dysfunction, and whether there are any programs underway in investigating what the impact of the use of human growth hormone is on brain recovery from traumatic injury or
you can try that one.
aging.
There are a great number of things that are being looked at in terms of recovery from traumatic brain injury, and despite many decades of well-designed clinical trials, we haven't come up with a winner yet. So there's still a lot of research that needs to be done out there, and I don't know very much about the growth hormone treatment of it. There's a handful of ongoing clinical trials, but I can't comment specifically on that one, sorry.
I think the other point is that there's such a broad spectrum of injury and in traumatic brain injury that it's important to understand the natural history of how natural evolution happens in order to look at effect sizes. I think there's another question from the balcony.
Yes, a question for Dr. Troyer. I wonder if you could comment on some of the memory and aging work that Baycrest is doing that I know you've been involved in, looking at some of the strategies that people can be perhaps implementing as they start worrying about memory changes with age?
Sure. Yeah, so a lot of what we can do about memory is also behavioral. We've talked a lot about biology, but also in terms of our day-to-day lives, there are lots of things that people can do to maximize their memory, and they tend to fall into two different types of categories. There are the lifestyle types of factors that we can do to improve our brain health that we've already mentioned here about exercise and diet and being cognitively engaged and being socially connected with people. All of these factors are associated with better memory and decreasing the risk of developing serious memory problems as people grow older. So that's one category of things that can be helpful for memory. And the other is there are a lot of strategies that people can use on a day-to-day basis that will help them remember specific things. So a lot of things are things that people already know about repeating things to yourself or making things meaningful, and but specifically focusing on things that you want to remember and putting the effort into being mindful about it and consciously applying strategies. They will not cure memory problems that people are having, but help people function with them better so that they can maintain a better quality of life.
Okay, I think we have time for one final question.
Yeah, picking up on what you just said, I read of a couple in the United States. I think one's a psychiatrist and one's a theater artist, and their research started trying to figure out how stage actors memorize their performances. And I think over the years it has morphed into realizing that amateur theater is a great way to keep your brain in shape. Could you speak to that? Because it is working at the top of your emotions to repeat something meaningfully with mindfulness over and over again. Could you speak to that, please?
Sure, and there's actually been some research being done that looks specific, okay. So there has been some research on that, what types of specific activities people can do that promote their memory, and actually being in theater is one of them. I don't know if it's because people are memorizing things, but there's something about being in or engaging in activities where you're learning new things, where you're solving problems, and being exposed to novel things that promotes memory. So being in the theater is one, volunteering is another activity that promotes brain health, and other activities where you are learning new things.
You said that Alzheimer's is easiest to treat before it becomes symptomatic. So how would you diagnose it at that point? Are there like physical effects? How would someone be able to go for a checkup?
Right, so these are critical questions, and part of our study at the OBI is to look at the trajectory of disease at the earliest signs and how they evaluate over time. But it really comes down to the tools that one uses to screen, and that's right up your alley.
If at the very earliest stages, before something like Alzheimer's becomes very obvious, there are subtle changes in memory. So there are some changes in memory that everybody experiences at one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, in something like Alzheimer's disease, there's very serious memory problems. And in between is where it takes a very sensitive, very specific type of tool to detect it. So at your doctor's office, and your doctor may send you on to someone like a neuropsychologist that can do very detailed testing to see exactly how much you can remember in what kinds of circumstances, and comparing you to other people of the same age. So it takes very specialized tools to be able to pick those up. Just a casual conversation usually will not reveal very early signs of memory problems.
You can do different techniques to improve your memory through practice, but given that things like Alzheimer's disease can be genetically transmitted, how much of your mental capacity to memorize things is passed down genetically as opposed to can be developed?
I'll take a first crack and pass it on. So there certainly are predispositions. Alzheimer's disease is not typically inherited in a one gene, you 50% chance type way. These are polygenic disorders. There are other risk factors associated, especially the coincidence of vascular disease, depression, and these can all impact your performance. How to tease that apart from the actual Alzheimer's disease process turns out to be rather difficult, especially in the early pre-symptomatic type patient.
I mean, I could add that there are lots of different things that contribute to how well you remember things. Genetics is part of it, and genetics you don't have a lot of control over. You inherit the genes that you do. But on top of that, the behavioral things and the lifestyle things add to it. So even if you have good genes or if you have bad genes, the behavioral and the lifestyle choices that you make do have an influence above and beyond the genetic ones.
The incidence of genetically inherited Alzheimer's disease is relatively rare. We're talking about maybe 1 to 5%, depending upon whose numbers you look at. The vast majority of Alzheimer's disease is not genetically inherited. As Dr. Mickelson said, it's a complex polygenic disorder that is interwoven with the environment, with life experiences, with lifestyle. There are many anecdotal things which come together. So for example, some groundbreaking work that was done here in Toronto was the discovery that lifelong bilingualism on a population-based statistical level, so this doesn't have anything to say about an individual, but across a population, lifelong bilingualism delays the onset of Alzheimer's disease by approximately 5 to 7 years. Now, I took this to a meeting where there were pharmaceutical scientists from pharmaceutical industry. I said, you guys would love to put that in a pill, wouldn't you? All right, so the movie that we saw and an understanding of the complexity, what does this tell us? It tells us that there are neuronal networks that are being activated, that are creating this synaptic plasticity that you saw so beautifully pictured in this movie, that is contributing to brain health. And the same thing can be said, as Dr. Troyer was alluding to, with memory practice, with music, with art. So all of these things are part of lifestyle experience that can have an impact on brain health. So cognitive activity, cognitive engagement is a medication.
Or to paraphrase, use it or lose it. All right, we're going to tie it up there. Thanks so much for coming out. Appreciate it.